jQuery. Here's my little fake Twitter that I made for you guys, and we're gonna make this pretty much all the work except for the CSS. I don't have to redo that for you or the HTML, but we're gonna make this for you guys. And so here we have two existing tweets. One of them is from a very famous web developer who I like a lot, and the other guy is Paul Irish, so there you go. No, just kidding. Joe is one of our members, and if you don't know who Paul Irish is, he actually is a real famous web developer. So anyways, so let's get into it here. I'll show you the HTML and stuff so you can get familiar with it. This top area right here, the tweet area, is one div tag, and then this area down here is called tweets, and that's another div tag. So here we have the section for the post. I guess they're post or sections, not div tags like I thought. And then we have a div tag for field, and then inside of that we have our input with a placeholder, an anchor for this is the font awesome thing that we were just talking about. And then down below we have the section for the tweets, and we have two existing tweets. So you might pretend that this initial source was served up by some sort of back-end technology, and so the initial source already has some of the HTML for the tweets, but we need to dynamically make more tweets. We need to be able to dynamically, make this right here. And so I want you to kind of study this because we're going to make this. It's basically just a div tag with a class of tweet, and actually I'm not even using this anymore, so we'll get rid of that, the data tweet. There's this attribute called data user ID, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then we simply have an image with the H3 and the paragraph of what they tweeted. I'm sure this is nothing like what a real tweet HTML looks like, but this is just for our demo. Is everyone familiar with what this data attribute is? I'd like to talk about that maybe later if we get a chance. Maybe I'll just introduce it a little bit right now, but we're not going to get too much into it. You're not supposed to make up your own attributes in HTML. People have done it in the past. You're not supposed to. It's one of those things that a validator would scream at you for, but the browser's not going to break down or anything. It's not like the website's not going to work if you make up your own attributes. In fact, someone at the end of the meeting the other night was talking about how they make up their own tags for stuff sometimes, just flat out make up their own tags. And the browser, yeah?
That is no longer true. You can arbitrarily create attributes now. That is officially valid in HTML5.
Oh, it is now?
Yes.
Well, what about this data?
The data does give you extra accessors in jQuery.
In jQuery?
Yes.
Okay, well then I guess that is true. So what I was going to say is that the way you make your own attributes is you say data hyphen, and then you get to say whatever your attribute is, and you can have access to that with jQuery and everything else. So that's cool. You can make up your own attributes. Is that something that's very browser compliant or not very browser compliant?
Yeah, it's even going back, older browsers will just kind of ignore the tag.
Yeah, because like I said, people have been making up their own attributes forever.
Right.
They just were never passing validators. So.
Yeah, nothing's really changed except somebody said, okay, yes, you can do that. The validators won't break anymore.
Sounds good. Okay, so anyway, it becomes necessary to store some information about each one of these tweets, maybe the user ID, maybe the tweet ID or something, because if you can imagine if I was going to delete one of these tweets, if it was like my tweet or something, or maybe these aren't tweets, maybe they're like widgets on something, when you click that delete link, you need something to hook into that tells you what this thing is, that you're going to delete, and it's usually going to be like an ID to a database or something. So I just wanted to explain that real quick. Let's go over here to the JavaScript. This is a jQuery, beginner's jQuery tutorial, so I apologize if some of this is really, really super, super beginner, but we got to go through some real basic house cleaning stuff so that everyone is on the same page. So I'm sure most of you are probably familiar. I'm actually going to change this real quick to okay, so you can see this right here. Is everyone familiar with this? I'm sure some people might not be. So here's how JavaScript works. If we go to my HTML, we have this include right here at line 13, which is where we're including this script.js. Here is script.js. If we were to just start doing JavaScript or jQuery, either way, outside of here, like let's just make all the div tags, give them background color of red or something. Okay, so if we were to do that, make all the div tags, have a background color of red. This is how jQuery works. You have jQuery, which is your $ in parentheses right here. It's technically a function. You can also say jQuery like this, and that works as well. The $ is basically just shorthand. Okay. All right, so then what you pass in right here, you can pass in all kinds of stuff, but one of the things that gets passed in normally is a CSS selector. If you're familiar with doing some CSS, such as, like right here, we're looking for the post, thing has an ID of posts, and then any children of that have field, and then, any children of that are an anchor. So in other words, post, field, anchor. Okay, so that's how we do CSS. This is a selector. We could just as easily copy that and paste it right in here, and that would work. jQuery does really cool things with selectors that CSS can't do. That's not what this talk is about. There's a bazillion articles out there that can tell you about those sort of things. So we'll talk about something more interesting. But generally, the way jQuery works is you say your selector right here, select order if I can type, and then you say do something, right, like that, and then you say do something again, and you can keep on doing this, and this is called chaining. And just to kind of explain what's going on, when you call this function, the $ function, the jQuery, and you pass in the selector, it goes in and finds that, and then it returns an object, a jQuery object, that has whatever you selected as a part of the jQuery object. So you can think of this right here as being like the object of jQuery. And if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, maybe in other traditional programming languages, when you have an object, you can do dot syntax to access the members of that object. You can say, if you have like a person object in some other programming language, you can say person dot get name or something like that, right? Those are the members. And so with jQuery object, you can say jQuery object dot, and then there's all these methods that you can do with jQuery. And then when this method gets called, it does all that to the jQuery object, and then it gives you the jQuery object back again. And so now you can chain and keep on doing this dot, do something else, dot, do something else. Okay. The art of chaining and how to do it and everything else is also something that is very well documented, and there's lots of resources, so we're not going to get into real complicated chaining. What I want to get back to though is here we have this div tag, and we're saying it takes two properties right here, background color, and then I'll assign it red. We'll go and save this, and it's not going to work because we tried doing this jQuery outside of this guy right here, and I'm going to explain what this is too. But notice if I put this in here, it will work. Oops. Okay, makes all the divs red. The idea here is that when this script.js gets loaded into this line at line 13, JavaScript, or rather HTML in the browser, it takes every tag, one tag at a time, and loads it into DOM, and as soon as it sees JavaScript, it starts working on it. So if we had JavaScript in here, and JavaScript that's white out in the open, it's going to start trying to do that, and the problem is, right at that point in time, this is what the DOM thinks, or the browser thinks that your DOM has inside of it. It's not even aware that there are any div tags, okay? So, there's a couple things you could do. For one, you could put this script tag down at the bottom. That would be one way to do it. But a better way to do it is to not require your script tag to be in any particular place. Just do this line of code right here. This is called the, I'll refer to it as the document.ready or just the .ready. And you basically put all of your JavaScript in here if you want it to work when the DOM is ready. It waits for the DOM to be ready before it calls this. If you want some more information about how this document already works, I made like an hour video on it, so we're not gonna get into any of those details right now.
Is there a shortcut for that?
There is a shortcut for that. The shortcut is what I deleted, which is if you just do this right here, you can just take this, which is called an anonymous function, oops, copy, and you can just do like that. That's the shortcut for it. Yeah, it's just that I'll probably refer to this as the document.ready, and I want you to know what I'm talking about. We did the presentation the other night, and I kept on referring to it as document.ready, and there was no document.ready. I was using the shortcut, so I don't want there to be that confusion. But there is a shortcut. They do the exact same thing. Okay, so here we go. This is where we put our jQuery when the DOM is ready. JavaScript is extremely object-oriented. Some people say that it's not, and they probably don't quite know what they're talking about because it is very object-oriented. Practically everything in JavaScript is an object. There's lots of ways to declare objects, even functions when you declare them. The functions are objects. Functions can have functions inside of them, giving a namespace type concept, and you can make objects that way. There's another way to make an object. If I make a variable here, v equals, and then curly's like that, this is what's called an object literal. And it looks a lot like JSON, if you're familiar with what JSON is. JSON actually stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So there's a difference between object literals and JSON. What we're doing right now is an object literal, and I'll explain the differences here in a second. But what we can do is we can say like user ID equals 4, and then you do a comma, and then you can say username, do me, comma, sweet. Might as well, right? Hello world. Okay, so we do that, and then I'm going to do console.log. We can say v and use the dot syntax because after all we're talking about an object here. We can say v dot tweet. How about that? Okay, we'll save that, and we'll go in here and refresh and open up our console, and you can see that it is right there. Okay.
For those that don't know how to open the console.
For those that don't know how to open the console, well, you can go up here and look at the tools and open it that way. I do Control-Shift-I on Chrome. I know there's other keystrokes to do it. What else is there?
Command-Shift-I on the Mac.
Okay, Command-Shift-I on Mac.
F12 on IE, I believe, if you want to.
Well, that's IE's tools though. This is for Chrome's tools. Firebug in Mozilla is going to be probably a different keystroke.
Yeah.
Every major browser these days has some sort of concept of a tool like this. And actually, 2 meetings from now, we're going to have a presenter talking about these tools and like in depth. So that's going to be really fun.
Oh,
Okay, so anyway, let's get back to here. So you understand that we have an object that we're working with here. It's a lot like an array in a sense, but it's not an array, it's an object. If you're familiar with PHP, you might be familiar with what's called associative arrays, which means you can have an array that has named keys instead of traditional numeric keys. And I don't know if there's that sort of thing in Ruby. I'm not a Ruby person, but I know that there's not that sort of thing in Java. I think there's like hash tables and whatever in Java. People have different ways of accomplishing it, but there are ways of having like named key arrays in different programming languages. And if you look up in JavaScript, if you look up on Google, how do I have PHP's associative array, how do I have that sort of thing in JavaScript, you might get referred to this object literal concept, but it's actually an object, it's not an array. It kind of behaves like an array in a sense, but one of the things that we can actually do here is actually have a function. We can say foo function like this. Maybe we can say, we'll use an alert this time, whatever. And we can say v dot foo. And so we can have functions that actually belong to our object as they should. Refresh, there you go. Great. Okay, so that is object literals. You can also have one of these members have further another object literal, so that's important to know too. And if you wanted to have an array, arrays are square brackets. That's a array literal actually. Okay, so we're gonna start with this right here, and we're gonna start building some DOM. So there's lots of ways to build DOM. I can say, inside of here, I can say, let's do like a div tag or something. We can do like this, close the div tag, and we can assign this to, let's see, tweet equals like that, and we can say hello right here, and then let's see, I want to go ahead and append that to our tweets, and so it's called ID tweets, and so if we append to section tweets, it'll end up right here at line 40. So if we say tweets dot append, like that, hopefully this will work, refresh, and it ends up right there. And if I use the DOM inspector, you can see it right there. And so there's our, you see our 2 tweets right there, and then you can see the one that I made. If you were to right click and view source, it wouldn't be there because your source is like your initial set of HTML that went to the browser. Whereas if you need to examine a DOM that got added after the fact, you would use a tool like the one I'm using right now. Okay, so here's the thing. This might be the easiest way to make HTML, but it's like the super inefficient way to make HTML. There are several other ways. I actually benchmarked the different ways, and I ran like 15,000 like tweets or whatever on this little system. And mostly I did it for validation to be sure that the way that I do it is in fact the fastest. I don't know if there's a faster way to do it, but this is the fastest. So with native JavaScript, we could say var tweet equals document dot create element div without the caret brackets. And that would make a in-memory version of a div tag. So we could take this right here and put that right here. And if you think about it, it's making this div tag with native JavaScript and then just passing along to jQuery. jQuery is saying, all right, you're good to go, you're already a div tag. If you pass in a string that's a div tag, or even worse, like a string that's a div tag with nested div tags, with nested anchors and all kinds of nested stuff, it has to go through regular expression style and figure out all these tags and build it all into memory and all the attributes you might have on those and build those into memory. So it is quite a bit slower. If you read any blog about performance on jQuery and speed in building DOM dynamically, the first thing they'll talk about is appending incorrectly, and we're going to talk about that too. But in my benchmarks, appending incorrectly added about 1 second for 15,000 iterations, whereas doing the DOM incorrectly added about 2 or 3 seconds. And so building the DOM is in a certain way is very much more important than the append thing, although they're both important. Are we with everyone so far? You guys good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes?
Is there a way to modify the DOM without, like you said, like you, on the browser source code doesn't show it, but you can still modify it internally. Am I clear?
Modify internally?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So you're trying to modify that.
I can go in here and modify this
But
right
it
here.
doesn't show over there. You can still modify it.
I don't know if I understand your question.
Like, I'd like to modify the DOM, but I don't want the end user to see the modification.
What would you have in DOM that you don't want the end user to see?
Yeah.
Something I put from the server, and I don't want that information.
Then
visible.
keep it in an array or in objects inside of JavaScript. If you're just collecting data that you don't want the user to see, keep it inside of memory. If you're going to put it on the DOM, it's on the DOM. They can see it. You can put it on the DOM and give it some invisibility, display none or something. But
it's something that I have to display.
well,
But then you can copy and
I
paste
can't think of
that.
any reason why you would have DOM that you don't want to show the user, but goes onto the screen. If you're just trying to hold on to information about the user or something, just keep it in JavaScript's
Yeah.
memory inside of an object. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's move on. We're going to make another thing just like this. We're going to call it, actually we're going to make a few more. So let's make a few more. Bear with me here. We're going to make our image. And we're going to make our H1. paragraph, and this will be image, H1, paragraph. Okay, so from here, this right here gives you that in-memory version of DOM. From here we can say add class tweet, and then if you remember, there was also the data of user ID. Sorry. And we're gonna do user 4. I think that's me. I have a certain user that was me. Anyways, to make this a little prettier, we can break this down and go like this. I think it's easier to read that way. With the image, we need to have a source, so we'll say attribute, and we'll say source, and the source is going to be the images folder slash something dot JPEG, and so right here, we're going to put, oh, you know what I forgot to do? We don't need to put 4 right here. We're going to say v.user ID. And right here, we're going to say v.user ID also, because that's what the images are named after. Got to do our little plus signs for string concatenation. The H1 is the username, so we'll say .html, and we'll say v.username. And then the paragraph is the tweet, so we'll say HTML v.tweet. Okay, so everyone look over that, make sure it's what you expected. I'm looking over my notes, making sure it's what I expected.
For those that may not know, what is the difference between the attribute, setting an attribute and setting the HTML?
Well, the HTML is going to set the stuff that goes in between the tags, and setting an attribute is setting an attribute. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. With the attributes, you say the attribute name right here, and then the second thing is the value. With the attribute method and the HTML method, if you pass in something, then you're setting something. If you were to want to retrieve whatever the HTML is, you can do that. And so this would actually assign whatever is the existing paragraph HTML to this variable. But so it works as both your setter and your getter at the same time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then we need a way to put this on the screen here. So for one, we need to kind of compile it all together, because we have our tweet and we have all the individual parts, but we need to be able to say tweets, and then I'm going to say, I could just say tweets append, but if you know Twitter, you know that actually the new stuff goes on top. So I'm actually going to select the first tweet, okay? So by saying tweets space dot tweet, we're basically looking for here, and then here. And actually, I haven't said first tweet yet. We just are looking for all the div tags that are tweet. But if I do the pseudo selector, we can talk about pseudo selectors here too. We can say first, and that gives the first one. Pseudo selectors are what Joe pointed out the other day when we were talking. The easiest one that everyone knows is the hover of anchors. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the hover state of anchors, it's like a special state selector of that element. Is that a good way to describe it, you think? Okay, so that's our first tweet, and if we say .before, we're basically going to put our tweet just before our new one that we're making, just before this one. So .before is kind of like a slightly different way of doing an append in a way. So then we'll say we're gonna do our tweet, but we're not just gonna do our tweet. We're going to the tweet first. We're gonna append the image, and then we're gonna append the H1, and then we're gonna append the paragraph. Make good sense so far? Mm-hmm. So basically, it does all this first. Takes the tweet and it appends these 3 parts to it, and then once it gets a final product, which is a jQuery version of DOM, it inserts that. So let's run this and make sure it works. We'll refresh, and there it is. Oh, you know what? I don't think it was supposed to be an H1. I think it was supposed to be something else. H3. H3. Very good. Okay. That's the problem with doing these live versions of demonstrations. sometimes.
You just wanted your tweet to be more important than the other tweets.
That is true. Okay, so we'll do that and that and that. Okay, so that works. So here's the thing. We just showed you how to make some dynamic DOM, but this is happening in real time as soon as we load the page. We want this to happen when a person actually tweets, when a person types and actually clicks tweet, right? We're gonna make DOM in that case, but we're also gonna have another case where that little message that comes up that says you have some more tweets, you have like 2 more tweets or whatever, you click on that and then it loads tweets, and we wanna reuse this functionality. So let's go ahead and make a little function. It doesn't make any sense to make your functions down here in the DOM.ready because the functions can exist outside because the functions can exist without the DOM being ready. You're just gonna call the function when the DOM is ready, if that makes sense. Okay, so we'll say var make tweet equals function. We're gonna pass in an object literal like that. So let's take all of this and put it up here. And now you can see why I was using the v thing, because I knew that I was eventually gonna make it a variable like that. So now we don't need the v variable right here. We can just say make tweet like that with parentheses, and we're calling our function. We're calling a function make tweet, and we're passing in one argument into the parameter of v. That argument just happens to be in real time object, making this object in real time right when we need it. Okay, so so there you go. Let's run this, make sure everything still works, and it works. And my tweet is no more significantly better. Okay, so that's great, but we still need to have this interaction where when someone types up here and hits this button, that's when the tweet should happen, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about event handlers. First of all, let's select our anchor, which is right here. Remember, the anchor belongs to the field, which belongs to the post. Remember, I have that over here in CSS, so I'm just going to drop that for the sake of time. And we will say, we'll direct this selector towards our anchor, the thing that we want to interact with our click. And we'll say on click, and then right here, we're going to put in a function. Now, this kind of goes to that video that I made a while back, but you could say var foo equals function, blah, 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 and do all kinds of function stuff right there, and then you can pass in foo right there, so you can pass in the name of the function. But that's not really what we do as JavaScript developers. There's no reason for this function to exist on its own, because we're not going to call this function except for in cases when we actually click. So let's just copy this part right here and pass it in right there. So now the function doesn't have a name anymore, like foo. It's called an anonymous function. And if you notice, that's the same pattern that we already used for this guy right here when we were doing the .ready. So understanding anonymous functions is very important for understanding how to do jQuery. Same thing with understanding object literals, which I'm sure you're starting to see. So let's do this. We'll make sure that we got clicked on. So we'll say console.log click. All right, go in here and refresh. I kind of scrolled down on purpose. Anyone have an idea why? It's because I did something wrong on purpose to show you. And that is when we click on this anchor, notice that the anchor has a href of this pound sign. So when we click on it, what's going to happen?
Goes nowhere.
Well, yes, it's going to go nowhere, but maybe more importantly, it's going to jump up to the top of the screen, which would be really detrimental if we were really far down on the screen and you clicked on a link and it bounced you all the way back up to the top. Maybe you want that to happen, but in this case, we don't want that to happen, right? Okay. So how do we prevent that? Well, this gets into some good discussion, I think. There's one way to prevent it, and that is, this function, this anonymous function, that function gets called by the browser when that event took place. And so when the browser calls that function, they get to pass in some parameters. And the way that JavaScript works is it's possible to pass in parameters into a function, even though that function is not expecting any parameters. So trust me, this function was receiving parameters, we just weren't catching them. So let's catch the first parameter. It's the event itself and various information about the event. Some people do E, some people do event. I like to do E. So, did I just say I like to do E? So if we say E dot pre-event default, that fixes the problem. So let's go and do it again. Refresh and scroll down, click on this, and we get our click, and it doesn't scroll up to the top of the page. Okay? There's another thing I want you to understand about event handlers. This was really fun when we did this the other night, so we're going to do this. We're actually going to do an event handler for the field itself, and so we'll say field, and down over here we'll say anchor. Okay, so we're going to run this now, and I'm going to show you something here. Okay, both of them happened. The reason why that happened is because, yeah, we might have clicked on that anchor tag, but the anchor tag is inside of what? It's inside of the field tag. The field tag is inside of what? It's okay. The field tag is inside of the section ID of post tag. That's inside of the body tag. The body tag is inside of the document, right? Or is there one more? The HTML tag, and the HTML tag is inside of the document. Technically, when you click on something, the event for all of those things happens from the inside out, okay? And this is actually called event bubbling. There's another concept called event capturing, which is the idea that if you click on something, the event for the document would go first, and then the HTML, and then the body, and it would work its way down. It would go down to capture the targets as opposed to bubbling out to the outer parents. So there's event bubbling and there's event capturing. To tell a quick little story, back when browsers were new and there was real browser wars going on 10 years ago, of course the problem child was Internet Explorer, and they believed that everything should be, I think if I'm telling this right, I think they wanted everything to be capturing first, and the Netscape and Mozilla crowd wanted everything to be bubbling, and so the W3C decided that we're going to do both. And the way it works is, I think it captures and then bubbles. And if I'm wrong on that, it either bubbles and then it captures. But the point is, it does both. But when you do jQuery's event handlers, you're dealing with the bubbling. And I think, Joe, is there a way to do something with the captures as well? Do you know?
I'm actually not familiar with the capturing
Okay.
at all. I've only ever dealt with the bubbling.
Okay, so there's bubbling and there's capturing. Look it up. It's a complicated topic to understand because of all the different ways the browsers did it in the past. Okay, so going on, so you can see that the anchor fired and then the field fired. There is a way to prevent the bubbling from happening, and if we say e dot stop propagation, and we refresh this, click here, and only the anchor fires. Okay?
So what does that do? That just saves time?
If you don't need bubbling to
Right.
happen, why make JavaScript go through the process of doing it?
And that's the whole idea, is to make this as streamlined as possible.
Sure, but you also might have event handlers for that container, that in some cases, when you click on the container anywhere, that event handler happens. But maybe for this one button, this one instance, you don't want it to bubble and fire that. So that would be another good reason to do it. Whatever your reasons are, it's there for you to do it. Okay, so here's the cool part. Here's the trivia thing. I want you to understand that if we were clicking on buttons, or if you're clicking on a div tag, or you're clicking on anything, and you're doing this event handler for clicking, you can use stop propagation to prevent it from bubbling up. The prevent default, I've only ever used it for anchors. I don't know if it has another context it gets used for very much, but when you click on a button or a div tag, there's no concept of you know, the screen being jumped up or anything like that, because there's no href going on. So I've only ever used prevent default for anchors. So if you have a situation with anchors where you want both to be prevented, I don't do this anymore. I don't do either one of these. What I do is down here is do return false, and that does both of them at the same time. Okay? So that's what I do. So just to kind of prove it, you'll see that we'll get the anchor console log, we won't get the field, and it won't jump up to the top of the screen. Refresh. Oh, what's going on? I'm local, so that's really weird. Okay, so we'll scroll down a little bit, click on this, we get the anchor, we don't get the, we get the word anchor, and we don't get bounced up to the top. Sound cool, everyone? All right. Okay, so we can get rid of this thing right here and get rid of this little test. Now, so I'm sure you guys have seen other ways of doing click events. Is anyone new to the dot on click? Have you seen dot click, which of course then wouldn't need this?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Okay, have you seen dot bind click? And have you seen dot live click? Right, these are the three they see a lot,
I've seen mine.
right?
Was there a delegate in old jQuery?
I think there's a delegate. I don't know as much about it as I know these three, so I'm gonna avoid that altogether.
Okay,
Mhm.
but it is like a fourth option.
Sure,
basically, yeah.
okay. But I'm gonna talk about these because these are the ones that everyone says, oh, you're doing this dot on click, why are you doing that? I'll just do dot click, it's less characters to type. Well, there's actually a technical difference between all of these, and I wanted to talk about that. So dot bind click is the same thing as dot click. One of them maps to the other. I forget which one maps to the other. But dot click, at least nowadays, is just a wrapper for dot on click. So those first two, you should never do anymore. They're practically depreciated. I'm gonna explain something real quick. Is everyone, I'm not gonna ask that question, because I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what dot live does. So I'll explain it. When you say, hey, go look for this guy and apply this event handler to it, it looks right then and there, right when the DOM is ready, because we're in this spot of where the DOM is ready, it goes right now and it looks for that anchor. The way that jQuery works is anytime you do a selector and that thing doesn't exist, all that chaining that you do, all these methods that you call after the fact, it doesn't cause any errors. It's totally allowed. In fact, it happens all the time where you try to select something that doesn't exist. So what happens if we try adding an event handler to an anchor that doesn't exist yet? That's what the .live is for. That would take care of it. And I'm gonna explain why in a little bit when I have a little bit of a better example I can show you. But that's what .live was made for. Now, there's problems with .live, and it's depreciated now at this point. And so they replaced .live with .on. Okay, so you should always be using .on in all cases, no matter what. I mean, you can do .click, but that just maps to .on, so you are saving like, you know, a fraction of a second. Yeah.
One thing to backtrack a little bit, that return false, there's, at my old company, we dealt with it, there's a scenario, I don't remember what it is unfortunately, where return false gives you an undesired result. So that's actually not the best way to prevent that jumping up. And I'll just jump to the conclusion. The best way to do it is for your href to put JavaScript : //. Like I said,
Okay.
Yeah, remember I was asking about that?
Yeah, you were talking about that. Yeah, there's other ways to do it.
that's the best way that doesn't doesn't have any side effects.
I haven't experienced any of the side effects yet, so I'm not going to be in a hurry to go and change all my code. But yeah, there's other ways. There's other ways to do it, and that's probably a better way. I'll look into it, and maybe I'll start doing that. So
That would be.
I want to do a technique that's not going to have any feature problems.
What is, how does JavaScript : // how does that translate?
It basically translates into what you're trying to accomplish. Like you're putting the pound sign there, and you're basically saying don't go anywhere. The href is void. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean anything.
Yep.
And so JavaScript : //. It's just like HTTP : / is the URL for an href. Saying JavaScript is like a protocol, I guess is what you would call it at that point. And so it's just basically saying don't do anything. This is like make believe.
Okay, yeah.
It acts like a no-op.
Yeah.
What's that?
Basically, it acts like a no-op, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And
The
you got
void.
another version of that too.
Yes, the JavaScript, colon void, and in parentheses 0.
I've
Just
seen that
tells-
one.
Yeah, that's one of the most common ones I've seen, a lot of examples.
Yeah.
That you see.
And-
But that just void, tells the DOM just void this link.
And that, oh, go ahead.
But it's still, the cursor still points it as a hand, so you'll still get the link icon.
Yeah, that's the reason why I use
Over.
the href, is because without the href there and the pound sign,
Yeah.
something inside the href, you don't get the pointer, and it doesn't behave to any of the pseudo selectors like hover and all that kind of stuff. So does yours behave to all the pseudo selectors?
Yeah, so you need the href always, and so it's just a matter of what you
Yeah.
put in that href. And then between the three,
No, I guess I meant, okay, I know that your thing goes in the href, but your thing that goes in there
is
the
that
pound.
it makes it behave properly.
Yeah,
'Cause the
but if you
href-
just do a blank href, that also is just as good as not having one at all.
No, oh, well, yeah.
From what I'm talking about with the,
Right,
with
right.
the hover
And then
or something.
between the three, the pound sign, the void, and then the JavaScript colon slash slash, the JavaScript colon slash slash, like you can look it up, like that's considered the best. And then
Okay.
the other two
Send
have
me,
side effects.
send me a link to it, because I wanna learn it, and I'll send it out to everyone else, if you can find something for that. 'cause
Yeah,
we're
that'd
gonna
be
drop
great.
in. Okay, so let's go on, I'm just gonna keep it return false, if you guys don't mind for right now. Okay, so we're gonna go to the next part, we need to actually grab this thing that the person typed in. So, let's go and look at what that is. Inside of our field, there is an input for the tweet. And so right here, I could say, this is kind of the wrong way, I'm gonna show you the wrong way real quick. I could do this, right? And then grab the value. The problem with that, let's assign it to a variable too. Var tweet equals, right? Okay, we could do this, but the problem is we've already taken the time to go to the DOM and ask for it to do all the hard work to find this anchor. Now we're asking it to basically go and do very similar work to go and find this input field. So you could do this, but you're asking a lot of the DOM. The general rule is to not interact with the DOM as much, and that will speed things up. So one of the things that you have when you're inside of a click function like this is you have a variable, and the variable is called this. And if you think of object-oriented programming, that this word in this context means the same thing as it does in other object-oriented contexts, where that this word refers to the overall object that you're inside of, which refers to this function. Remember I said functions are objects, and so that this keyword refers to the this. And actually what it specifically refers to is jQuery's reference to your anchor. Okay, so saying $ parentheses this is just as good as if I copied this guy right here. So doing this would be super ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll take that away. It's hard describing the word this without using the word this in the description. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. We have, so we have our anchor, which is this keyword, and we have this input field, which is sitting right next to it. So we could say dot siblings input. So basically we look for any sibling elements, sibling element being an element that's right next to you, not necessarily physically right next to you, but anything that you and that other element belong to the same parent, if that makes any sense. Okay, so so we have that, and that's how we can get the value. Okay, so remember when I said that a jQuery object returns an instance of or the jQuery function returns an instance of the jQuery object? So we call siblings input. All of this now turns into the jQuery object again, but now it's got a new pointer. It's not pointing to the anchor anymore, it's pointing to the input. But then when you finally, there's some methods like .val, which I'm pretty sure just return a string. They don't return the jQuery object with a string inside of it. I think they just return the string. So I don't think you can say .val and then do other methods and do stuff. I don't think, but I might be wrong there. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go like this. We want to call our make tweet. And we want to basically keep everything the same except for this right These object literals are smart enough to know that the thing on the left-hand side of this colon is the variable name, and the thing on the right-hand is the variable name that you're making for the object literal, and the thing on the right-hand side is the variable that you probably made beforehand. Does that make sense? I mean, I could make this a string if that helps you sleep at night. But these strings on the variable names are not required. So if you see tweet like this, it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, so let's see if this works. Hold on one second. Okay, this should work. Refresh. Man, we're getting this like weird thing. Okay, so we'll do some writing right here, and we do that, and it all works. Looks good, right? So now we finally have some interactivity that makes some dynamic DOM. Okay, but here's the thing, this make tweet, we're gonna call that in other instances. For instance, when we want to loop through some data, and so I don't want this make tweet to be responsible with every single time I call it for communicating with the DOM, because what if I have like hundreds of tweets I need to do? So we don't want to put this up here at all. In fact, what we can do is just simply cut this part, and we can say return, like that. So we're returning the compiled tweet, if you will. And then right here we can say var tweet HTML equals, and then right here we'll go like this and tweet HTML. So it should pretty much do the same thing, but it's a little bit better now. So we'll refresh, go like this, and it works. Okay, so far we've got our nice little utility function right here. We've got the click right here. The next thing is going to be, well, actually, I forgot to do a couple of things here. Let's go back. This needs just a little bit more work. What happens if, well, first of all, notice when I tweet, this doesn't go away. And secondly, what if I don't have anything in there? It still tweets, right? So let's do something real quick. Let's make sure that we even have anything in tweet. So I can say if tweet.length like that. Okay, we'll do that, and then once we're done, we will say, oh yeah, we can say we basically want to make this input field back to nothing. So here's the thing: I could do this whole selector again. In other words, copy this down here, and I could say .val. And remember when I said if you pass something in, you're setting versus if you don't pass anything, like up here, you're getting. So we could do this, but this requires us to look at this guy and then do some DOM interaction. And that's not good, remember? So the very first time we ever got this input, we should cache that. And we should maybe do this. We should say var tweet equals, and we can say, change this to say tweet input. Okay, and then we can say var tweet equals tweet input.value like that. Now we can use this as kind of a little utility and go like that. Okay, this is called caching jQuery objects. It's the idea that once you've already selected something, store it so you can reuse it later. Okay, so let's make sure this all works. Refresh. Try to tweet. Nothing happens. Type something, tweet, and it tweets it, and it clears out the input field. Good so far?
Brad, I've got a question for you. Are sessions specific to PHP? When JavaScript is caching, is it caching a session?
When this is caching?
Yeah.
This isn't caching a session.
Okay.
If you toss a bunch of HTML and CSS and JavaScript out to the browser, and your session is only good on the PHP for, let's say, 1 minute,
yeah,
that's pretty short, and the person is sitting there interacting with a dynamic page like this, and there's no AJAX request going back to the server, if they're just interacting with JavaScript for 3 minutes, and then they try doing a page refresh, their session is gone. Now, if they do AJAX requests somewhere in there, those AJAX requests count as basically telling the server, I'm still here, and keeping your session going.
Okay,
Make sense?
yes,
Okay. Does that make sense to everyone?
When you use cache, before it was a different context.
yeah.
I'm sorry?
When you mentioned cache, it was only in the context of the JavaScript,
Oh, yeah.
not.
Yeah. Cache is just a generic,
Yeah.
computer word we use. Okay, so, we need to make that, that next little bit, which is you haven't seen it yet, but it's an anchor that says, that you have 2 more tweets, and so we're gonna kind of follow that, I could just make it, I could just go in here and just make an anchor tag right there, but that's not really fun. We need to make it dynamically, and I'll show you why. So we're gonna say document dot create element anchor, and then we're gonna say it's gonna have an attribute. Back to this guy again. href. And then we're gonna do add class. Get more, and then we're gonna do some text for it, and it's gonna say 2 more tweets. And what I want you to realize here, we could, stick this into a variable like bar, something equals, right? And then we could then select the container for the tweets, and we could say, for that selection, we could say append. But since we just made this thing and it's all good to go, and it doesn't, remember before when we were making several elements, then we had to kind of compile them all. I did this, things a certain way when I was doing that, but now that we already have the thing that we want to put in there, we can just simply say prepend to, and there's also append to. Realize that we're in the context of the thing that we're appending, and so you say append to or you say prepend to. If we were in the context of selecting the thing that's the container, we would just say append or prepend. So there's all these different options. Okay, so we're gonna say prepend to tweets. Okay, let's run this, and it should happen, right when the DOM fires up, if it works. And again, with this network thing, I don't know what's going on. So there it is, you see the 2 more tweets? Okay. Let's mimic, I'm not gonna do an AJAX for this, but let's mimic the fact that this DOM gets created a few seconds later. Let's do set timeout. Okay, set timeout allows you to pass in a function like this. And then that's your anonymous function, and then you get to say how many milliseconds you want to go by before this function gets called. So we can bring this down like that. Put this right here. Kind of just organizing a little bit. That is our timeout. See that 1 second later? Okay, so this is significant because we are going to do an event handler for some DOM that doesn't exist yet. Okay, remember a second ago when I said that we were doing the .on? What actually, my notes, because I don't want to get off track, they say that we're going to do AJAX next, so forget that. Okay, so let's do some AJAX real quick.
Before I move on, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So this is something I actually don't know the answer for. When you're manipulating the anchor tag, you're using text instead of HTML, right? But if this was like a p tag or div tag or whatever, you would set the HTML of that element.
If you're doing HTML, you can pass in HTML and it's done. If you do text, it's just simply text. I think you're telling jQuery not to parse it. I think if you did text and you actually passed in something like this, for all I know, or that's correspondence, class, text. Let's just do this real quick as a test. It might just actually, encode that.
Okay,
as text. So let's see what happens.
Escape the characters.
Refresh. There you go.
That's the difference.
Makes
Okay.
sense? Okay. So yeah, if I was appending HTML, like if this anchor had to have a span tag I could just put a span tag around it, and instead of doing text, I could do HTML, or I could do it the super fast way and actually make an actual span variable off to the side and do all that bit that we did before. Okay, so we're gonna do some Ajax here. Normally when I'm through the $, we're calling the function, and you see the parentheses right there, that's the jQuery function. There's also, you can just go directly to the jQuery object by doing $dot. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do. One of them is Ajax. And Ajax takes a handful of settings. How do you suppose they want those settings? As an object literal. And remember the curlies is an object literal? So we'll bring that down like that. And we will, we need to set a URL. The URL, let me show you real quick, is I made this get tweets JSON. Let's open this guy up here. It looks like this. This is JSON. The difference between JSON and object literals is that JSON is the string that might get passed around between server and client. Once that string arrives to the JavaScript and gets processed, it turns into an object. So to say in JavaScript that I'm working with, this variable is made out of JSON, it's not really made out of JSON. You're working with an object at that point. So JSON can't have the functions embedded into it too. So that's another thing. Did I say that right, you think? Yeah? Okay, that's about right. Okay, so here's our 2 tweets, and here's our people that we're gonna bring back. So the URL for that is get tweets.json. Of course, you would probably be communicating with like an actual PHP or Ruby or some other programming language. Okay, we do our comma like that. Ajax caches. We don't want to go to that Ajax page, or I'm sorry, don't want to go to that JSON one time, and then for every subsequent request, we don't want JavaScript to say, I've already been to that URL. Let's just recycle the stuff we got last time. That is what Ajax will do. So you need to make sure you set cache to false if you don't want it to do that. Obviously, since we're pretending like we're going to the script that's going to be serving up dynamic information, we don't want to cache. The type, this is like the when you're setting like Ajax requests are a lot like form submissions. There's like type equals post or type equals get, and so we don't need to actually send anything in terms of variables, and so the default type is get. I'm just going to explicitly say it just because. The data type is what do we expect back? Do we expect XML? Do we expect HTML? Or do we expect JSON? And then we get to do this. Success, which is a function that is going to be called as soon as Ajax comes back. It's important to know how Ajax works. When you fire off an Ajax request, let's say you did console.log A. And then you fired off an Ajax request, and in the success, you said console.log B. And then after the Ajax request, you say console.log C. You're going to get A, C, B in the output because the A is going to happen right away, and then the Ajax is going to fire off, so it's traveling off to the server. Then the next thing in code is going to happen. It's not going to wait for the Ajax to come back. It's going to fire off the rest of your code, and then it's going to fire off whatever you have in this success function right here. And that's what makes it asynchronous. That's the A in Ajax. Okay, so one of the things that this function gets passed in is data, and the data is essentially the JSON. Actually, I sometimes call it JSON. We'll just call it that for now. Again, it's kind of a misnomer because we are dealing with an object variable. I just called it JSON because it came from JSON. Let's just say that. So I can say console.log. Let's look at our JSON here. So there's a thing called tweets, and then there's an array, and then we have like a user ID. So let's say JSON.tweets, and then I think we can do this, and then I think we can do this. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I think if I have the dot syntax correct. So we'll run this. Of course, it's slow, and we get our 3 down here. Another thing that we get in the console is the fact that an Ajax request happened. So you can examine this and you can look at various things like the response or whatever, which is not working for me right now. Doesn't matter.
That is actually something you need to turn on in the settings to see that in the console though.
But it is turned on, fine.
Right, but maybe you want to show how to
Sure.
turn it on briefly.
Sure. So, all right, so, anyway, so there it is, there's our AJAX request. But we want the AJAX request to happen when you click on that anchor that didn't even exist into the DOM until a second after the DOM was loaded, right? So we got a little bit of a task at our hands. Now let's copy this, just so you can see the structure here. Go like this. Put this right here. Close it out. Okay. All right. So now the thing that we're going to click on is this anchor with get more. Right. So that looks like this. It's actually in the tweets section, and then it's an anchor dot get more. Now we're going to run this. It's not going to work. Refresh. Oops. Refresh. Okay. Back to the console. So the fact that I'm hitting refresh, you know, that AJAX isn't firing because now we have it encapsulated into that function. So if I click here on more tweets, nothing happens. In fact, we get that anchor up there at the top. Because we tried attaching an event to an anchor that didn't exist, then the anchor existed, and the anchor was like, all right, I exist now, nothing's attached to me, so it just does what it's supposed to do, which is you click on it, it fires off this pound sign. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, we're gonna do what .live used to be. It used to be that if you did .live like this, then all of a sudden this would work, but .live is depreciated. Let me explain why we don't do .live anymore and why they're depreciating it. Remember when I said when you click on your targets, whatever you're clicking on, all the parents start to get the bubbling all the way up to the document? Well, jQuery, you know, the guys, they're probably sitting there going, all right, we need a way so that when DOM exists, event handlers that were added beforehand can apply to this new DOM, right? How do we do that though? Because the DOM doesn't exist. We're in a real pickle, right? It's like the chicken and the egg kind of thing. So what they said is, all right, well, what if we do .live, click like this, and instead of adding the event handler to the actual anchor, what if we just add it to the document? That's the very top level thing. So that when you click on the anchor and it bubbles up to the document, eventually the document has this click event that is registered on behalf of this selector for this anchor, and it goes, oh, we have something for that, and it fires the event. That's how .live works. Can you imagine the inefficiencies of doing .live like 40 or 50 times and adding all these event handlers to the document, and every single click on the whole screen, whether you're clicking on something significant or not, jQuery has to look at all the things you registered with the document and see, did you click on that, 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 oh, you clicked on that, okay, you clicked on that, yeah, go through that whole process. Can you see how inefficient that would be? So that's how .live used to work, and it was always criticized for being inefficient. And then they thought, well, okay, what if we don't add the event handler to the document? What if we allow the user to add it to any parent that he sees fit, and that way the document isn't taking the burden of everything. Okay, so that's what .on allows us to do. So what we're going to do is right here we change this to look like this. And it looks like I have, there we go. So what this is saying is register an event handler with the tweets element. And anytime the tweets element gets clicked on, check to see if the target, the thing that got clicked on, is an anchor with a class of get more. So now the burden is on the tweets element and not on the overall document. Does that make sense? Okay?
Do you still want live there, or is it
You want
supposed to be on?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not supposed to be live. It's supposed to be on, you're right. Sorry about that, it should be on. Okay, so when you use .on, if you use it in the context that we used up here, this is a lot like using the old .click, where the DOM has to exist ahead of time. But if you use it in the context that it is right here with a thing that's in between the click and the function. And then, of course, the part that's over here needs to be some sort of parent. Then it works better. And you know what's funny? You'll read articles about this new method, and some people are doing that. How dumb is that? Basically, you
Yeah.
got rid of .live because it was a burden onto the document, so now they're just doing this and basically reinventing the burden onto the document. Okay, so we'll go like this. Now, you guys know, you guys already saw how it didn't work, right? Let's do this now with this, and hopefully, program did it right. Refresh, this exists, click on it, we get our XHR, and there's our number 3. You guys all see that? Okay, so it totally worked. We added an event handler to something that didn't even exist yet, and then we made it exist, and everything still works out. This is why you should use .on all the time. Just use it correctly. Okay, so what do we have next? Okay, so we actually need to take this JSON and do something with it. So let's loop through it. We can say, there's another thing. Remember how we did the $sign and then we did .ajax, and we're actually accessing the object of jQuery and calling a method instead of doing like a selector first. There's another one where it's $.each, and a lot of people will say you should never use jQuery's .each because it's just a wrapper for native JavaScripts for each, I think is what it's called. But just for the sake of, since we're showing jQuery, I'm just going to show you jQuery's .each. So we can say this, and we can pass in, you pass in whatever your object is that you want to iterate, or your array that you want to iterate, and then you have this anonymous function like this, and basically jQuery is going to call this function with every single iteration of your object, and it's going to pass in the key and the value. Okay, and so now if we do console.log, and the V in this case, actually I need to say, JSON.tweets. That was important because if you go back here to our JSON, this is the overall JSON that we're getting back.
Right.
We need to access this member, which, see the square brackets, it's an array. So every one of our V's is going to be one of these rows right here. So we need to say JSON.tweets, and then the V, so I can say v.username. Okay, let's run this, refresh. And this is really weird, right? I'm going to complain about it every single time, just so you know. So if you're like, he keeps on complaining about it. All right, so we're going to click this, and we get Conan, and we get Paul Irish again. Okay, I'm sure you guys are all interested in what Conan has to say on my Twitter. Right? Okay, so we just looped, and we can see that we get the information. The V basically represents the same thing as what we were doing up here when we were making this guy right here. They were passing into make tweet. So let's do that again. Copy that, go down here, and we will say make tweet, except we don't have to actually do this guy, we can just pass in V. And then we can say, and this is of course the wrong way to do it, but I'm going to show you the right way in a second. Now that we have this tweet, we can say, oh, what is it? Let's just go fast. Right here. Everyone understand what we're doing? We're looping through the JSON we got. We don't need to do the console.log. We are making the tweet out of each of those rows. We get this variable, make tweet, or rather tweet HTML, and then we're putting it in. Okay, so let's go over and refresh, and we get our thing here, we click on it, and then we get Paul Irish again and Conan now coming from JSON. Pretty cool, right? Okay, for me, it's not cool enough because what if we had lots of things to iterate? Every single iteration we're sending something to the DOM. Sending new HTML to the DOM is painful for the DOM. It is resource intensive. In fact, I think this is a good time to watch a video. What do you do you guys think? You guys wanna watch a movie? Let's go to YouTube, and we're gonna search for Mozilla. Oh my gosh, I can't spell virtualization. It'll figure it out. Maybe not. Did I spell that like way off?
So close.
Okay, isn't that what I searched for the other night? Something like that?
Yeah.
Here, we'll do this. Here, this is what we'll do. We'll do,
I think it was pitfalls.
Mozilla. Here we go. So, let's talk about repainting. Check this out. Okay, that should be nice to you guys on this one. Pause it because they show you like the website for like a half second and then it goes away, and then you know YouTube shows like other videos and stuff. So looks like they're making the Firefox Thunderbird website. All that just happened, that is called repainting, and help me out, what's the other one? It's repainting and reflowing. Repainting is, let's say you hover over an anchor and the CSS has to change that anchor to be a different color because you just hovered over it. It has to paint the screen again. Repainting happens pretty quickly. Anything that's like color-based is just a repaint. But anytime you stick in new DOM, it has to rebuild everything, because sticking in the new DOM means that all kinds of stuff can be restructured and rechanged. Because you guys know how sometimes this DOM is dependent on this DOM and float lefts and all these things that can really matter, right? So you change one thing and it has this like cascading effect, and it has to do that whole thing that you just saw all over again. So if you iterated through 15,000 of those tweets, which, you know, I got 2 tweets, right? But if I put a for loop around the part that actually makes it, the for loop, let's say, does like a, 7,000 or something, and so therefore it'll actually put out 14,000 of those tweets. Every single iteration of the loop, it's doing an append. It's doing one of those repaints and reflows every single time. Pretty expensive, right? You're lucky that browsers are so awesome and that they can do that so fast, but don't strain them any more than you have to. It would make a lot more sense to loop over these tweets. I only have 2, right? So it's not gonna matter, but let's say we loop over these tweets and we collect them into an array or into a string, and then once we have them, then we can dump them all into the browser. It'll do one reflow. It's a lot better, right? So let's do that. And again, this